such as osteogenesis imperfecta. It is a skeletal disorder, okay, but it will come in under osteodysplasias. Then dysostoses are malformations of single bones or in combination. And you get multiple exostoses and all those kinds of conditions in that. Disruptions are secondary malformations of bones, and typically the one we associate this is with rubella. Okay. And then chondrodysplasias are the genetic abnormalities that affect the growth plate and lead to abnormal growth, okay, what we call skeletal dysplasias. So this is really just the same thing again, so that gives you the reference over there, but really what you want to know, if you're trying to evaluate a child with suspected skeletal dysplasias, you want to know what the bone density is doing. Is it normal, abnormal? Which bones are affected? Okay, is it just one bone or a number of different bones? And then what you want to know is what part of the bone is affected. Okay, if you can answer these three questions, then you're pretty much that way. You've got most of the work done actually. Now, this is a complicated slide, but it just illustrates the point that what you can do is once you find these things out, is you can put them on a grid like this. And again, this information is available through this particular website, so which is a UK group, which is a skeletal dysplasia group. And what they have is, if you become a member of this group, I think it's very cheap, it's something like £10 or something, is what they do is that they can send you these charts. And you can keep these charts in the clinic. And when you see a particular patient, is that you would then sort of, or on the postnatal ward, is that you would put all this information on there, and it will give you some idea of what the diagnosis is. Okay. Now, why make a diagnosis? Well, there are, of course, with all these things, there are positives and negatives about making a diagnosis. So the positive is that the fact that if you put a name to the condition, it makes life a bit easier for you to predict what's going to happen in the future. It relieves uncertainty, okay? Because quite a lot of the conditions are of course, medal at the last Paralympics. So with achondroplasia, you can do really well. But of course, the downside is that there can be problems. Over here, this patient over here has cervical medullary stenosis. Just make out over there. So there can be problems as well with conditions. So one has to again give a balanced view about these conditions. You don't necessarily have to say that everything is going to be rosy with achondroplasia, but at the same time, you can have really positive things as well about the condition. So to make a diagnosis, I've alluded to the fact that you need to know what's happening with the bones, and radiology is very important. A skeletal survey is important, and there are particular ways of doing skeletal surveys, and again, the information is available on the skeletal dysplasia website. Some biochemistry may be important to exclude sort of conditions like vitamin D deficiency, hyperphosphatemia rickets, sort of mucopolysaccharidoses and so on. And then of course sometimes genetic tests may be useful as well. And of course if you know what's going on, then it would be useful to do secondary tests such as echoes and renal ultrasound scans. Our own experience in Glasgow is very much like this. So this is over the number of years, and this figure actually shows the number of cases where we thought we had the diagnosis, cases where we don't think we've got the right diagnosis, we don't know what's going on, and some cases where we've excluded, that have been referred to us and we can say that there's no diagnosis. Now, no diagnosis of skeletal dysplasia. And over here at the top, you can see that, roughly speaking, so the black cases over here are those whose diagnosis is clear, okay? The grey ones are the ones where the diagnosis is grey or unclear. And roughly speaking, over the years, our proportions haven't changed much. So in about 60% of the cases, we think we get the diagnosis. But more importantly, in about 30% of the cases, we just don't know what's going on. Okay, so that's over time, that doesn't seem to be changing much. And then also over here, it tells us as to how many cases we do full skeletal surveys or limited surveys. And you'll notice that over time, we've kind of, there's kind of half and half over here. It stays about that kind of mark. So I've got a little bit of time, so what I'll do is I'll illustrate the case, I'll illustrate the whole thing through a case. Okay, so this is a child called Dean who was born term forceps delivery in a district general hospital, so somewhere a bit further away from Glasgow itself. Slightly small, 2.65 kilograms, okay. Had generalized edema, widely spaced cranial sutures, okay. They were really widely spaced, and you'll see what I mean when you see the x-ray. No dysmorphic features, and the skull x-ray was performed. And on this you can see his anterior fontanelle, as well as the sutures over here, that they're really widely splayed. Okay, so you can just make out over here that they're actually huge, yeah? So he had the widely spaced sutures, and they are really wide. They're not the kind of things you would see in other children. When he had his initial test done, you can see on day 1, there's nothing really wrong with him, except for his alkaline phosphatase level, which is 93 units per litre. Okay, and the reference range is 180 to 500. Okay, so he's got hypomineralization on that X-ray, and then his ALP levels are low at 930. Okay, at 93, I mean. So the parents were told that this child has hypophosphatasia. Okay, and that's associated with that kind of hypomineralization, and this is what the parents recall. I'm not completely sure whether this is what they were told, but this is what they recall when they came to the clinic to see me. They were more or less told that the child could go home to die and that he was likely to have hypophosphatasia, which would be fatal. And that comes back to the communication we have with parents at birth or soon after birth, is that they may remember the worst parts of the discussion which we had. And I think it's quite useful to have some written sort of documentation of what was discussed. Again, I don't want to go through this in detail, but again on the Skeletal Dysplasia Group website, what you can see is that they have little crib sheets for each condition, okay? And you can sort of distill from that. And for example, for this hypophosphatasia, they've got all the features over there, and genetics, clinical features, X-ray features, differential diagnosis, progress and complications of management, and so on. So from this, you can actually get quite a lot of information, and I'm skipping through this in the interest of time. But I think the most important thing, of course, is when you have an abnormal test, is repeating it before giving too much information to the family. And by day 12, this child's alkaline phosphatase level was in the normal range. Okay. By 3 months, this child had a normal hearing test. He was a bit hypotonic, and now his clinical features were developing. So he was hyperteloric, had down slanting palpebral fissures, flat nasal bridge, thin bow-shaped upper lip. Okay, so there were some features which were developing. And that's another important thing about skeletal dysplasias, that they develop over time. The clinical features develop over time. So it is always quite useful to be non-committal initially, and then become a bit more aware of what's going on. And I think that helps. So at this point, the genetics team saw this child, and they were thinking of a condition called pycnodysostosis, which is also very rare. Okay, and again, there's a whole list of things about this, and I'm going to skip over that, but that's again available, and we can look at that in detail. By 5 months, he was reviewed at our clinic, which we call the Complex Bone Disorder Clinic. Parents were desperate for a diagnosis, okay, and discussion was really around the differential, okay, what may be. We reassured them on the positive aspects of this child. Okay, he was doing well, he was achieving his developmental milestones, he was quite short, and reviewed the previous X-rays. And then at 16 months, we did a repeat skeletal survey. Okay, and by this time he had delayed dentition, slow growth, hypermobile joints, and we discussed it. After the clinic, we have an X-ray meeting where we sit down with the radiologists, the geneticists, orthopedic surgeons, and myself, and we discuss cases jointly. And all agree that we don't know what's going on. So this is what he looked like. So you can see now his facial features, and some of you might know what the diagnosis is. And you can also see what's happening with his growth. His length is not increasing pretty dramatically, it's actually slowing down, okay, and his weight is in proportion to his length. And this is another issue about these cases. What tends to happen is that if the health visitor or the nutritionist sees these children, then they tend to, because of the fact that their weight is very low, they tend to feed them quite a bit. And of course you need to be able to assess the fact that the length is quite low as well. So he was actually okay, he was in fact a bit chubby for his length. And now you will see his repeat skeletal survey over here, and again you can see that he has the same sort of widely spaced suture over here. I'm not sure if you can see this clearly, but he still has Wormian bones over here, small islands of bones across here, and a big sort of gap over here as well. Okay. I don't know if you can make out his clavicles. So you can see the clavicle on the left side, possibly not on the right side. Okay. So there are some real issues about this child's bones. So, of course I didn't mention the pubic bones, that they're not there, and there's a big gap over here as well. Okay. So he has these conditions. So he's got abnormalities of his skull, he's got abnormalities of his clavicle. So again, it comes back to that cladocranial dysplasia. So this is the letter which I wrote to the family, and it was actually to his general practitioner as well as to the hospital, suggesting that, we discussed this. The diagnosis of cladocranial dysplasia has become more obvious following a last X-ray meeting, and this was all discussed through that. And we mentioned the fact that it's likely that he will have some growth retardation, Okay, although there are two kinds, there's one with no growth retardation and one with growth retardation. I think he falls into the category where there's going to be growth retardation. That's not rocket science because he was short. It certainly seems to be progressing very well with his development. And then what I did was attach a list of features which these children can have, okay, and explain to them that he doesn't have all of these, but that's something which we just need to keep an eye on. And then we thought we would do the genetics. Now, initially when we did this, there was no abnormality of this RUNX2 gene, but when we repeated it, sent it to another lab, we found that there was an abnormality, but what was the case was this whole gene was missing. Okay, so if you look for mutation analysis and you don't find an abnormality, you don't find a gene mutation, that's because of the fact, it could be because of the fact that the whole gene is missing, and that's why they couldn't find the mutation. Okay, so he's got a complete deletion. So to wrap it up, if you have a bone disorder service, then although there could be two meanings to this complex word over here. Of course, we're looking after children with really complex conditions, but a bone disorder service has to be quite complex because there's so many different people involved in it. So over here, you will see is where I work. This is a map of Scotland, of course, and then what we have is the bone disorder service sitting over here with lots of links to people. So in this condition, we have genetic links with occupational therapy, and occupational therapists actually come and sit in our clinic. And we have links with a number of different support services, a research group as well, linked to that. And of course, our sort of colleagues in adult metabolic bone, where we transition our cases onto. Okay, so there are a number of links over there. So I'll stop over there. Thanks very much.